So we're over 90% of the way complete with NFL Week 1 action, and I want to get you guys kicked off on a Monday morning here with 10 of my favorite waiver wire pickups here for Week 2 fantasy football. These are players that straight up balled out in Week 1 and proved that they are worthy of fantasy roster places here. Guys that showed they're actually going to be utilized in their offensive systems, and guys that are depended upon by their offense for production. So we'll be talking briefly through each of these 10 guys and why I like them on rosters here for Week 2 and moving forward. Let's not waste any time and let's get into the video. Of course, as always, if you're new around here, make sure to drop down, click that like button, and subscribe to the SFS channel. We're posting multiple long style YouTube episodes here per day the entire fantasy football season. I'm also posting today my breakdown of Week 1 action, 10 of my biggest takeaways and lessons learned from this past week's games. So make sure to go check that video out after you're done watching this one. And of course, again, subscribe if you're around here. We're trying to grow the channel and help out as many of you guys as possible for this season. So Darrell Henderson is the first player I want to talk about for Week 2 waiver wire pickups here. He's currently owned in just 46.1% of ESPN fantasy leagues, and this is going to travel back to last Thursday night for the opening NFL evening kickoff window. So essentially, Darrell Henderson just kind of took the world by storm, surprised a lot of people when he was actually the lead back, severely outsnapped Cam Akers in that game, and was the go-to player on all 3 downs for Sean McVay. This is a guy who I think McVay and that coaching staff currently has a lot more confidence in, and what that shows us from that Thursday night game with Darrell Henderson being the lead rusher for this team, and Cam Akers, again, looking as if he's in the doghouse right now, whether that's something, Coach Sean McVay said he wants to see some more urgency from Cam Akers, or that's simply the fact that he doesn't fully trust his health and his recovery process to this point. Yes, he's played football multiple times, dating back to the NFL playoffs last year since that Achilles return, but still, you're seeing the fact that since that injury occurred, Darrell Henderson or other names like Sony Michel dating back to last year have been the go-to player for this offense. So for me, for the time being, Darrell Henderson's the running back to own for this backfield. I still think it is worth having Cam Akers on your rosters if you want to go out and buy super low for him. I don't, hate doing that because I do think as the season progresses, he will get factored in more and more into this offense. But for now, it is Darrell Henderson, again, just rostered in 46.1% of ESPN leagues. And the Rams are a very solid offensive team. They're going to get better. They're going to bounce back this week. They've got a much easier matchup against the Atlanta Falcons, where you could maybe even figure Darrell Henderson into an RB2 or flex position in that game. Next up here, we're heading to the Kansas City Chiefs for Isiah Pacheco, owned in 18.1% of fantasy leagues. Plain and simple, Pacheco was the Chiefs' leading rusher this week. He was outscored in fantasy by Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who had 2 receiving touchdowns here, but Pacheco had 5 more carries than Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who had 7 rushes for 42 yards. Pacheco led the offense with 12 carries for 62 yards and a rushing touchdown. So a very good NFL debut for number 10 Pacheco of the Chiefs against the Arizona Cardinals. It was pretty much a blowout. They controlled that game from start to finish, so we'll see how things kind of chop up here for Week 2 NFL action. But this is a very valuable roster add to have, especially in leagues where you're looking for that running back depth. The deeper your leagues are, the more valuable Pacheco can be to lineups. And if something were to happen to CEH, he could become even more valuable to fantasy teams. Curtis Samuel diving into the wide receiver market for the first time here of the Washington Commanders, owned in just 8.5% of leagues. He wowed in Week 1, and I absolutely loved what I saw. We know he's a dang good football player. His route running is phenomenal as a slot weapon underneath. He can be a very good safety blanket. He's a very versatile and dynamic player, and he put that on full display here. He led the Washington Commanders this week with 8 receptions on 11 targets for 55 yards and a score. Those 11 targets netted him a 26.82% target share in that Commanders offense, the best by far of anyone else on the team. And again, he led Jahan Dotson, who had 5 targets, and Terry McLaurin, who had 4 this week, having more than double both of what those 2 players had individually. So obviously showing he's going to be a critical piece of that passing offense week in and week out, and a dependable safety blanket for Carson Wentz underneath. Just like Curtis Samuel, I love his teammate Jahan Dotson this week as well, who again, 2 guys out-targeted Terry McLaurin this week. Now, I don't think that this is kind of a paradigm shift in Washington's offense where you're going to see Terry McLaurin become this number 3 wide receiver now. I don't expect that to be the case, but what we are seeing is potentially sort of a wide receiver by committee approach here. What I mean by that is all three of these players, maybe not Curtis Samuel because of how many targets he got. If that's a consistent and constant factor in this offense here, you can feel very comfortable with him. But my point being here is that there may be some inconsistency, especially with Dotson and Terry McLaurin. You might see one or the other pop every given week. Dotson got the best, the greater end of the stick here, scoring 2 reception touchdowns in this particular contest. He did only have 4 receptions on 5 targets, but he definitely made the most of it and was someone, again, 40 yards, 2 TDs, only a 12% target share, but his role could definitely expand and grow here. He was a high first-round pick this fantasy season, this NFL season, and as he continues to find success here, especially having such early season success, we could see that role expand as we progress through 2022 here. Devin Duvernay is the next wide receiver I want to talk about, so moving away from the Commanders now. He is barely rostered at just 2.3% of ESPN leagues this year. He had 2 touchdowns in the season opener for the Baltimore Ravens. Lamar Jackson, just to be plain and simple here, has really liked Devin Duvernay when he's been on the field throughout the course of his career. Now it looks like he could be poised to be in that field stretching role for this offense, and that's a very valuable thing to have here. This is a situation that's been opened and a role in this offense that's been kind of, the door's been kicked wide open in terms of someone being able to come in and recoup those targets that Marquise Brown left behind. Yes, there is a raw volume of targets at play here, but while I love Rashad Bateman and his route running ability, his capability of being the true number 1 wide receiver for this offense, he also played very well in limited volume, but still was able to produce a 49-yard touchdown off of the 2 targets or 2 receptions he ended up having there. But Devin Duvernay took the top off the defense as well. Again, he caught all 4 of his targets. He had 54 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns here. Rashad Bateman caught just 2 of 5 targets for 59 yards and a TD. So both of these players didn't see a super large amount of volume head their way, but they were both very efficient. If Devin Duvernay can continue to be that field stretching asset for this team, he could find himself some high upside flex value lineup utility for the duration of this season. We'll watch and continue to monitor how that role expands or maybe has some fluidity here throughout the rest of this season. Heading over to our first quarterback of the 2022 NFL season, let's talk some Marcus Mariota, rostered in just 3.9% of fantasy leagues this year. Mariota balled in week 1. I was very, very impressed, especially early with this Falcons offense, and in particular, the run game here. Marcus Mariota's passing numbers were not all that gaudy, just 215 yards and 0 touchdowns. Kyle Pitts wasn't too involved in this game. Drake London actually did okay when we look back at things and look at the box score, but their presence wasn't overly felt throughout the majority of this game. Where Mariota's presence was really felt, though, was in the rushing phase of things, and if he continues to do this sort of thing, he's going to be a high floor fantasy play and a really nice quarterback too to have rostered on your leagues. He had 12 rushing attempts, 72 rushing yards, and a rushing touchdown here. That gives you a whole lot of value at the quarterback position when you've got such a premium on rushing ability and production versus having 10 yards for a point in rushing for standard quarterback scoring versus 25 yards for a passing point in that same traditional quarterback scoring. So very valuable pickup here. Again, a very safe quarterback too, as long as he stays healthy. That's really been the struggle for him throughout his career here, and I expect him to continue to do very nice things. This is a strong Saints defense, or at least a defense that has been formidable in years past. They've been a little bit susceptible to the quarterback run. However, Mariota did very, very good and impressed me in this week 1 matchup. Next up here, let's head to the running back position and talk some Jeff Wilson Jr., owned in just 3.5% of leagues. We'll know a little bit more about this come Tuesday evening or whenever your waiver wire transactions process here for your leagues. Maybe you've just got a first come, first serve league. If that's the case, then best of luck to you guys to be smashing those waiver periods very early. But basically what happened here, Elijah Mitchell was ruled out very early in the contest against the Chicago Bears with a knee injury. He was running the ball really efficiently, really effectively, and that absolute monsoon of a contest in Chicago at Soldier Field. But then, that knee injury occurred. He went out of the game. Insert Jeff Wilson. Tyron Davis-Price was a healthy scratch. That is a key note. He will probably suit up in next week's contest, but Jeff Wilson was the guy that got that next nod and was able to, get some opportunity with Mitchell off the field. So we did see a fair amount of Deebo Samuel involved in that run game and at least underneath passing game as well. So that's something to keep your eye on here. But until Tyron Davis-Price gets the chance to break out, until they start really incorporating him into this offense, it looks like Jeff Wilson Jr. is the next man up. And if Elijah Mitchell is to miss some time, this is the guy you want to roster. I will note, though, he was very, very inefficient. Just 9 carries for 22 yards, so barely 2 yards per carry here in this contest. We hope he can do better in the future. But again, you weren't really passing the ball effectively, so Chicago knew they could sell out to stop the run. Dontrell Hilliard. This is a super interesting name to me here this week. Another running back, a player who led the Titans in receiving production this week. This guy absolutely killed it. He had 2 receiving touchdowns, wasn't super involved in the rushing game. We all know that's King Henry's job. He's going to be that ground and pound monster, the guy that wears the defense down. But Hilliard was lining up in the slot, doing some work in the passing game, and proved to be a reliable weapon for Ryan Tannehill, Traylon Burks, and the other slot receiver. I'm blanking on his name right now for the Tennessee Titans. Kyle Phillips, of course. My bad there. Both ended up getting some run and having some decent flashes, but it was Hilliard that ended up chalking up the most points in the box score and being the player that at the end of the day led this team again in receiving production. So I'm not sure how constant I expect that to be going forward here. I do think it was a bit of an anomaly and an outlier, but if you're playing in a deeper 14, 16-man league, heck, maybe even in a 12-man league that has a bunch of roster spots, maybe you've got 3 or 4 flex positions, Hilliard might be someone worth stashing on that bench because he did show some flashes, some good run after catch here this week, an ability to get off the line quickly and catch a pass out in space. Jamaal Williams, another name that I'm surprised he's available in this percentage of leagues. 35.9% of leagues is his rostership here, if you will, for this season. If you're a DeAndre Swift owner, you need to be picking up some Jamaal Williams. Jamaal and DeAndre were both very productive this week. Jamaal had 2 goal line carries, netting him 2 rushing touchdowns, and he was just a very solid player. At the end of the day, I apologize. My Apple Watch keeps going off here. I'm going to mute that because it's quite annoying. At the end of the day, DeAndre Swift is the man in this offense. He is the guy that's producing the most amount of points in production in both the rushing and receiving phases here. However, Jamal is a very good handcuff to have. He's a capable backup in the event something happens to DeAndre Swift, and right now he's looking like a guy that may have some standalone value in those deeper leagues. So if you want to pick him up, not a bad idea to pick him up and maybe try to sell him high to that DeAndre Swift owner in your fantasy leagues. Robbie Anderson, I apologize. I just realized I've got his name spelled wrong here. It's Robbie Anderson. He changed his name. He's also wearing jersey number 3, but I couldn't find any good images. We'll have to wait till next week if we talk about him to switch that up. But he's got 37.8% rostership here this season. Robbie balled out, looked like the wide receiver 1 for Carolina. I'm not convinced that's the case. However, that is what the production speaks to here for this week. 5 receptions on 8 targets, 75-yard house call touchdown reception over the top, a 1-play drive for Baker Mayfield. He just uncorked that thing downfield, and Robbie was down there waiting for it. He had a 29.62% target share here in week 1. Very, very impressive numbers and very good volume to take a peek at there. And again, out-targeted DJ Moore, who had just 3 receptions on 6 targets and a 22% target share. So I don't think at the end of the day, this situation is how things are going to play out here for Robbie Anderson in this Carolina Panthers offense, but it is very interesting to look at, and it's worth noting because Baker showed some confidence and some, obviously comfortability throwing him the football both downfield and near the line of scrimmage. Of course, if you had 102 yards receiving, but 75 yards of it came on 1 play, you're looking at 27 yards off of 4 other catches. So clearly, that average was majorly boosted up by 1 reception here, but still a player that has some decent utility for lineups and could be considered a flex level player. Obviously after a few weeks, if we see that Baker Mayfield is continuing to get him the ball at a consistent level. So those are 10 names, again, excluding Monday Night Football, anything that might happen in that matchup that I love adding here for Week 2 fantasy action. These players balled out this week. I'm feeling good about their outlooks going forward. And of course, we'll continue watching and evaluating how they're incorporated into offenses here. But these are the guys right now that really caught my eye. There are a couple other names that we could toss into the fray here as well. And I'm happy to chat about that stuff down in the comment section below. So if you guys enjoyed, make sure to smash that like button. Subscribe if you're new around here. Check out some of the links in the description description of today's episode and sign up for sizzlefantasy.com so you guys can get my personalized help and obviously advice for this season. Message me on the community Discord server. There's a ton of stuff to take advantage of, so go check out those links in the description and all of our other platforms here from Sizzle Fantasy Sports. So thank you so much, you guys. I'll see you in the next video. Remember, go check out that top 10 lessons learned and takeaways from week 1 episode, and I'll see you there. Peace out.